The main purpose of this activity, or this kind of task within the knowledge area, is to make sure that we collaborate with the stakeholders. We make sure that we've got a common vision, a shared set of objectives and goals that we all work towards. And that's the whole reason why we would need to engage them not just once, but continuously throughout the life cycle of the project or the product development. So that means that we would need to make sure that the communication from us and from them to back to us goes in a continuous manner. And how can we make sure that happens? Because we would then, if if we do not make it happen, then obviously that means there is a discrepancy, there is a gap in our understanding of their expectations and goals, or their understanding of what's really happening on the ground from the team. So there is a bit of a discrepancy, and we need to bridge that gap. And how can we do that? We need to make sure that the roles and the responsibilities clearly laid out. So we've got, let's say we've got a business analyst, we've got a domain analyst or a data analyst. So even within different types of analysts within the team, we need to make sure whose responsibility is what. And then there is an architect who would actually provide the blueprint for the overall architecture of the application. Then there is the development team who would go ahead with the implementation. Then perhaps we have got designers, UX designers, visual designers who would give the user interface and the user experience aspect of it. We've got the testers. So many of these different type of team members involved, so many different stakeholders involved. So we need to make sure there is, as we discussed already in the previous sessions about the RACI matrix, the responsibility, accountability, consulted, and then informed, so that that matrix has to be well maintained. And that would mean that we all have a common understanding in terms of what we are doing and where we're trying to contribute with respect to the project. So higher the significance of change impact. So there is obviously, that means that the more focus would be definitely catered towards the stakeholder collaboration, because there is more interest, and obviously there are more stakeholders who've got not only the power but also interest in what is really happening, right? So that is really, really key. And that again takes us back to the technique called PIG, right? Power, interest, grid. So using that, we can understand what is the level of impact and what is the level of interest and the power influence amongst the stakeholders, and how can a program or a project or a process initiative that we're working on, how can that potentially impact them in the long run, right? So we need to make sure that is clear. The collaboration helps in capitalizing. So obviously we would make sure that there are positive vibes in the organization. That if there are positive vibes and positivity amongst the stakeholders, is they hope and expect to see things coming out of this initiative, good things happening, perhaps even better, or way of delivering things, cutting costs and or improving sales, or all the objectives that we have set out for the business. If our project or the initiative or the program that we're working on is going to deliver and help the organization achieve that, that's a big plus from everybody, isn't it? So that's the greatest collaborative exercise. Everybody would like to jump on and then contribute from their own perspective. And we need to, as BAs, we need to continuously monitor. We need to kind of keep an eye on what's happening with respect to stakeholders' attitude towards our initiative. Are they feeling positive? Are they feeling neutral? Are they trying to actually kind of, there, as I mentioned before, some stakeholders might actually feel that they're, even though they have got the significant power within the organization, because of the fact that either they're not interested or they're not given enough input into what's happening, they might start feeling a bit negative about this, and then they might come out with kind of sabotaging the initiative, which could potentially happen, as we discussed. So we need to make sure that we have got a good handle on all the initiative, the attitudes of the people, how they're responding to this initiative. Are they being positive about, are they supporting it? If not, what could be done to improve their expectation and their working with the initiative, whether it's a program or a project or whatever it is. And in terms of the input-output diagram from within this managed stakeholder collaboration, obviously we would have the stakeholder engagement approach, which we've done the first knowledge area, which is obviously the output from there, and that becomes an input into this. And we'll have the business analysis performance assessment in terms of identifying the measures, the metrics, the KPIs, all those things that we can actually try and improve upon in terms of how we can engage with the stakeholders, the reporting, the visual indicators, all of those would really help us. The balanced business scorecard. And then the task that we do in this one obviously would be to manage the stakeholder collaboration. That's important. We need to manage that. And how do we manage is what we'll try and see in this slide and the next slides as well. And obviously that would mean that we need to engage the stakeholders continuously. The engagement could happen in many ways, and we discussed that it could be a written communication, it could be an interview, workshop, or it could just be some kind of presentation sent to email, either of these. And then they need to know what's really happening with the initiative that they have, that they have actually contributed to in some way. And what are the things that we would try and have a look at is basically the business analysis approach. That's very important. Again, that would set the kind of methodology, the approach that we have adopted or we're going to adopt to continue this initiative forward. What kind of business objectives, the goals, the vision, the mission, and the tactical and the operational aspects of what we're trying to set out. From the business perspective, the hug, as we discussed, the big, hairy, audacious goals, and how they convert into the tactical and the operational goals, and then that would actually become the smart objectives for the project. So that actually kind of a trickle down effect, right? So at an organizational level, we would say that we want to be the leader in the transport of consumable business, for example, and then that big hairy audacious goal of becoming the leader, or a global leader across the world, not just in the UK or EU or US or India or China. We're actually talking about a global leader. So that means that it's a pretty ambitious goal as an organization. And how do you achieve that is basically through multiple strategic initiatives. And that's where you need to have that strategy. We remember that most thing, mission, objectives, strategy, and then the tactics, right? So that's how we actually kind of percolate down to the specifics, and from there you actually churn out different projects, different initiatives to help achieve that big audacious goal. And then the future state description is, if you notice, this is where we are really getting this, right? So initially we started off with understanding what is the current state, the as is situation. What are the problems? What are the needs? What are the challenges? What are the constraints? What are the systems, applications that we're currently using? How are they fitting in? What are the challenges with these things? What are the constraints that we have? All of these are providing us a kind of a foundation or a platform on which we can stand, and then propose or even look at the next steps in terms of where we want to go. And that is the to be state, the future state, right? The proposed solution. How does that look like? Still, this is fairly early. You're not really talking about the actual, the bells and whistles and the overall perspective of what that proposed solution would be. You don't have a clear idea. You're getting there. It could be really woolly at this stage. It could be very, very high level, 30,000 feet overview of that. But we are slowly getting there because we have now got a better understanding of where we are and what we're doing now and what are the problems and what are the areas of improvement. That understanding is actually helping us to get to the next stage. So we are forming that rough idea of where we want to go. And that's where the recommended action, the next steps would come in. So if you want to go from here to here, from the current state to the future state, what could be the set of actions that you need? What could be the set of initiatives you might want to do? Who are the people that you would like to get into the organization? Do you want to train up people? Do you want to upskill them? Or do you want to actually get somebody else, right? What kind of tools do we need? What kind of resources, the hard resources do we need, right? And all of these decisions are going to actually pave the way for you to go from here to the to be state, to your proposed solution. And then the risk analysis results are coming. Again, we talked about the risks and what kind of analysis goes on in understanding the people risks, the business risks, the market risks, technology risks, all those kind of risks, what are the mitigation strategies and all those things, right? So we would then come up with a mitigation, risk mitigation and risk management sort of activities and risk management outcomes. So from there, what could be the kind of analysis that you have done and what are the results out of that? Again, that would be part of that. So that is the comprehensive set of what you're going to pretty much focus on in the stakeholder collaboration, managing of the stakeholder collaboration. And what does that mean in terms of really the, as a BA, how would you need to work on this and how would you actually progress yourself from the current stage to the next stage? So there are different ways that you can do that. Obviously, the first one is basically to get the buy-in from the stakeholders, and that getting of the buy-in is basically is about you are trying to set the expectations with them. You're trying to make sure they are clear about what is expected of them, and then you are also clear in terms of the time, the cost, the effort, and the resources that is required for you as an organization to invest in and to actually take it to the next level. So you need to get the commitment, get the support from the senior management, from the stakeholders. And then we need to also have a tab on the engagement of how we are managing these communications with the stakeholders. How are we going to make sure that we are keeping it steady, keeping it periodic, regular, and then making sure that their expectations, their attitudes, and their interests within the initiative are kept, consistently at the right levels, right? So we need to also have a tab on that. And how do you do that? You actually ask them to give a feedback. You engage them in sort of meetings or informal communication, formal communication channels. Try and ask them and get the feelers. Sometimes you can actually see the feelers from these people, but sometimes it is more implicit, so it's not always explicit. So we need to be doing a bit of deep dive to understand how these people would react to what you're trying to say, or if they've got any other, any other hidden agenda in supporting you or in opposing your initiative. So all of these things need to be managed, and that's a pretty tricky skill to obtain. So a bit of diplomacy is required. In terms of collaboration, you need to really be able to collaborate with the team, try and get both internal as well as external. Perhaps you hire consultants, you work with third-party organizations, you work with small companies, startups, big organizations, you actually get the specialists into things, and then you try and make sure that you're taking the right steps to deliver the solution that you have always started, that you have always wanted to take off the ground, right? So that's where you wanted to have a free flow of information, both from internal to outside and from outside to inside, right? So there should be obviously some level of NDAs and everything should be there in place so that it's not, people are not really taking advantage of the information that is being shared across. So some NDAs and strict security protocols should be there. But then once you have all of them in place, it's all about engaging the stakeholders, the team members in the right ways, triggering them with the right amount of creative steps so that they could come up with ideas, they could come up with more and more better ways of engaging all the way through. And that's where we need to ensure that the stakeholders feel that that whatever they're trying to deliver to the project, that's actually recognized, that is not just forgotten or it's not taken on board, but we should give them a sense of achievement, a sense of satisfaction that yes, I'm recognizing your inputs, I'm recognizing your insights and your contributions, and that's helping our projects and the organization to grow. So that's very important to do. So a lot of those kind of reverse feedback and recognition is very important in terms of the stakeholders and their commitment and contribution to the project. And when you say what would happen if we don't have this kind of effective management of the stakeholder collaboration, it could lead to a lot of negative things. One obviously is you would not have good quality information. We could have information that is outdated. We could have information that is not correct or complete. So obviously that means that there are a lot of gaps and loopholes everywhere. And that means that people are not trusting in the information, in the insights that they're getting. So obviously that means that they're not happy with how things are going. And then it could also lead to a lot of strong negative feedbacks and hindrances. People are not trusting. The lack of trust, as we call it, as a trust deficit, that would lead to a significant cuts in the feedback loops and the cycles. So you actually see that it's all stopping. People are not trusting. People are not giving. They're not forthcoming in giving feedback. They're not forthcoming in actually helping and supporting others. And there's always that sense of resistance to change, isn't it? So for anything in the organization, whether that is with a business or with us as human beings at a personal level, we are averse to change. We're so averse to change that we are, as they say, we are creatures of habit, human beings. So once we form a habit, it takes a lot of time to break it, and then from there to get to another habit, it takes even more effort, right? So there is the sense of resistance to change and the aversion to change across the spectra, across the sort of human beings and the teams and the business units and the big organizations as a whole. So it's very important that we understand that as a fundamental construct of how we are. And then we don't want to actually fight it, but we want to kind of embrace that change. We don't want to fight change because changes are like, as we discussed in the agile development process, change is inevitable. So embrace it, don't fight it. And then obviously that means that we also need to make sure that the support and the participation of stakeholders is there consistently, pretty much in all the activities that we do. So we need to have that kind of rapport, that sense of positivity around the whole set of organizations and the stakeholders, right? So what kind of techniques would you really use within this activity in terms of managing the stakeholder collaboration? You would use a lot of collaborative games, as we discussed the last time around. There are a lot of innovation games, prune the product tree, buy a feature. So all of these would really help you to get to understand what is in the minds of the people, because sometimes it's so hard to express something so easily that others can understand. So what you do is you try and create the environment in such a way that they would be able to actually come forward in giving the ideas, in telling what is in their mind, what is in the depths of their mind and heart, should be able to actually come out with openly. And these kind of innovation games would help a lot in most of the cases. The lessons learned is again a good technique to understand, because it helps you to do a bit of retrospection, right? Look back, or even introspection in terms of looking inside, trying to understand what is happening within the organization, within the team. How have we done this work so far? How far have we come? What kind of path did we take? Is it a good path that we have taken? What kind of process did we follow? What tools have we used? How did this team gel with each other? How are the team members communicating and responding to each other? Are they supporting themselves? How are we interacting with the product owner? How is the support from the other business managers? What about the rest of the teams? Are they helping us, or are we getting enough support from the infrastructure team, from the technology team? Right? All of these we need to look at in terms of the intra-team communication as well as inter-team communication, right? So that's where we talk about all these processes involved, the procedures we followed, how we got here, what kind of things are there that require improvement. All of these need to be discussed within this kind of techniques. And as we discussed, risk analysis, very, very important in terms of understanding what is the kind of risk from different aspects. When we talk about risk, it's also not just the impact, the potential impact some incident could have, but also the probability of that the incident happening, right? So for example, what we're going through now is something that has never happened in the past, I don't know, 100 years. What we're going through in terms of this virus that we're talking about, um, the scale and the magnitude of the impact is never so much and to such an extent that happened in the last 100 years. So obviously that means that people don't expect that this happens every year. So we never, I mean, there were so many organizations which was taken aback in terms of how much impact this has created in terms of people's mental health, the productive lack of productivity, economy is going down. Some economies of the countries have gone into recession or potential to go into recession. There is such a huge impact. People would not have guessed that this thing can happen, right? I mean, in fact, you and me, even we can never imagine that we will be going through such a kind of rigmarole in the last few months. I mean, we can go maybe in a month, maybe a maximum of couple months, but now it's almost down to a year now. So who would have actually expected, who would have anticipated something of this scale affecting the not just the team, not just the business, not just the organization, not just the region, not just the country, but the whole world has been a mess. Why? Because, well, that is okay. That's out of our control. That's what is risk, isn't it? Risk is not always about what you have, what you within your control. It also means that it is something that is outside our control, outside our remit, but it is impacting us as businesses, us as individuals, as team members, us as human beings. So how are we prepared to counter, or how are we prepared to accept it? Because some risks can be ignored, some can be averted, and some have to be accepted. This is the kind of risk that you need to accept and then try and move on, because you can't do anything. You can't ignore it. You can't just avert it. You can't have, nobody would have taken a decision to say that, no, I'm going to avoid, I'm going to prevent this and thought something else, right? Because we've got to accept it. That's the only way to mitigate this risk. And how can we move on after accepting the risk is what needs to be done with the risk analysis and management. So in terms of the stakeholder list, the maps, the personas, the RACI matrix, and all those things that we were discussing, even though those are really handy. So that would tell you which of the stakeholders need to be consulted, which need to be informed, who of them need to be informed, who of the stakeholders could be just kind of maybe are held accountable for something. And we also can understand their power, their interest in the initiative, and accordingly we can manage our communication plans with them. We can make sure that we're communicating with the right stakeholders in the right way, with the right amount of information, in the right place, in the right time. So, and in the way that they would like to see the information. So all of these are, again, very important in that context. So, so now in terms of the stakeholders themselves, so who are the stakeholders involved? So you can see that there are all types of stakeholders that could potentially come into this picture. So we're talking about stakeholders, both internal as well as external stakeholders, who are technology people, who are business people, who are operations, all of those different shapes, sizes, and forms of stakeholders who would help us to get there. So that includes the end users, the domain subject matter experts, customers, the solution subject matter experts, then the testers. Obviously, testers would come into picture now because you need to validate some of the requirements that you've got. You need to make sure that the solution, now we're starting to get to a point of understanding what the potential solution could be, and perhaps even defining that, the to be state, the future state. So you won't actually have an involvement of not just the subject matter expert, but also some testers, architects, and perhaps so the team is now being formed as we grow further and further into the project in terms of the initiative. We are getting better visibility in terms of what we need, what the stakeholders are looking at, what they're expecting from the solution. And then with that knowledge, with that sense of resources that are required for us to either develop a product or an application or improve a process or to come up with a change initiative across a program, whatever it is. So we know that this is going to be the scope. And now with that knowledge, we can now have the team formation being done and trying to get the resources in place so that we can slowly start the actual work in terms of implementing that. Obviously, the customer is important at every stage. So customers and users are always consulted, their inputs and insights are sought, and that would then be fed into the overall planning and the activities we do. So that is pretty much what we have